is Mary Matzik with Calaveras Community Television. And we have a series of stories starting, and they are called the Storytellers of Calaveras County. And we're basically trying to get the wonderful personal stories of our old-timers. And I truly believe it's important to link the past with the present. Our ancestors sat around the fires and taught our children our children, how to name, how to count, how to give names to the plants and the animals. They told the stories of their ancestral backgrounds. They memorized these and passed them on. They talked about their escape from a savage storm, or maybe a wonderful hunt, or a child born. And they also taught us the dreams of the future. They shared their dreams. And though we've opted for a more written history today, it's more about statistics and dates and evidences and traditions and superstitions and religious beliefs and accidents among presidents and kings. In Calaveras County, our history is our heritage. Our stories survive in the bars and over the back fence from neighbor to neighbor. We like to talk about our personal tales of daring do. And every character we talk about is really a mixture of all of us. We clutch them to us. We may share a bit of evil, a measure of good, a hint of exaggeration, a little suppression, maybe some judicious reporting or some juicy gossip, suspended credulity. We search for the truth and justice and laughter and maybe the neighbor's cow. We laud our friends and family, our past deeds of strength and valor. Oh yes, every story is a tradition we love. And those stories form a monument to our immortality. So let the tall tales begin.
My name is Glenn Wasson. I live right here in San Andreas, California. You know, a lot of people disparage San Andreas. They say it's just a drive-through town. You drive through San Andreas to get to Angels Camp or Murphy's or Arnold or Big Trees or up there at Bear Valley. But there are some fantastic advantages of living in San Andreas. For example, you have international name recognition. For example, if there's a catastrophic earthquake in Indonesia and 50,000 people are killed, the press picks up on it all over the world and makes a big to-do about it, but at the end of every article, they'll always end up by saying, yes, but in California, they have the San Andreas Fault. And when that baby lets loose, it's going to make this earthquake in Indonesia look like nothing more than a little hiccup. Well, there's irony in that while everybody's heard of San Andreas, the fault, hardly anybody outside of our local community has heard of San Andreas, the town. And so when you travel away from this area, you can have some interesting conversations. For example, once a year I go back to the Middle West and renew the old family ties, and invariably somebody will ask me, Glenn, where you live in California? San Andreas. San Andreas? You mean the fault? Yep, the fault. Well, gee, ain't that kind of scary? Well, yes, it's kind of exciting to live in San Andreas. Everybody in San Andreas uses plastic dishes, and Grandma gets used to being picked up off the floor and put back into bed, but we manage, we adjust. But I gotta admit, we have some pretty wild rock and roll sessions there in old San Andreas. The other night there was a big rumble, and I went out to check on things the next morning. House down the street, about 2 doors down from where I lived, just disappeared overnight. It was just swallowed up in a great big chasm. I walked over to the edge of the abyss and I looked down, and I saw the people down there, and they were down below, and they looked up and they waved at me. But we're friendly folk in San Andreas. I went by later on in the day, and dropped off their mail. It fluttered on down to them, and the next morning I went back to check on them, and that chasm had just closed up tight. There was just no sign of any human habitation, just a smooth, level lot where that house had been once before. Well, gosh, what'd you folks do then? Well, there really wasn't much we could do. We just held a memorial service for the family and installed a tombstone right there in the middle of the lot. You know, in San Andreas, we don't have a central graveyard like they have in a lot of places. We just have tombstones scattered around here and there through town. Well, let me tell you something, mister. You can just keep that, California. And that's the whole idea, folks. No matter what you tell them, how bad it is, they love to believe it. Well, I've been very depressed recently. You see, as I approach my sunset years, I've become increasingly despondent, looking back on a lifetime of unbroken failure. Everything I've ever tried to do in life has been a resounding flop. You wouldn't believe my latest fiasco. It's been the ultimate humiliation of my life. You see, I set out to become a serial rapist, and I discovered to my dismay that it's almost impossible nowadays to find a woman who will withhold her consent. Threaten a woman with rape, and they all say, "Oh, goody, when can we start?" And I say, no, you don't understand. I'm cruel, mean, vicious, sadistic. There'll be whips, chains, and cigarette burns. You'll be forced to perform unspeakable acts. And they all say, "A promise is a promise. Wait till I get my spurs. I just love to ride a wild man like a runaway horse." And about that time, I'm the one that has to call the police. I tell you, folks, it's beginning to threaten my manhood. Well, I've had a lot of trouble with my insurance company lately. And I don't know why that is, because I've been a very good customer of theirs over the years. Why, just last month, I took out a $5 million policy with them. It was a $5 million life insurance policy for my wife. She likes to travel a lot, so I took her down to the Amazon jungle. And when I come back by myself, the insurance company seemed unusually inquisitive. They asked a lot of nosy questions. Of course, I couldn't produce a body. It was eaten by alligators. But that didn't seem to satisfy them. They've been investigating me ever since, and they thought they nailed me when they checked with my travel agency, and they discovered that I bought a round-trip ticket for myself, but just a one-way ticket for my wife. But that was easy enough to explain. You see, my wife, she likes to stay over and come back later on by herself. But that damned insurance company is still investigating me. But I will say this, that throughout this entire ordeal, my friends have been very loyal to me. They said, "Glenn, anybody that loses 7 wives in 6 years deserves their sympathy." But one of them said, "You know, with your track record, you may have a hard time finding another wife." You'd be surprised how easy it is when you show them a bank book with a $5 million entry in it. And by the way, if there's any of you ladies out there that would like to have dinner with me tonight, I'm looking for my 8th wife. One of the most cherished traditions of Calaveras County is that the largest gold mass ever found in the North American continent was found at the Carson Hill mine in 1854. A rough piece of gold that weighed nearly 200 pounds. This record has never been challenged or equaled in all the years since that time. But I have in my personal possession a nugget of even greater notoriety, not because of its size, but because of the circumstances surrounding its disappearance and recovery. This event took place in July of 1987 in the historic old hotel in Murphy's. It was picked up by the wire services, went all over the country, used as humorous fillers in newspapers. I understand it was on the front page of the New York Times. Johnny Carson chortled about it in the Tonight Show, saying up in Calaveras County they spiked their beer with gold nuggets. Well, this story is of such unusual nature that if Mark Twain were alive today, he most certainly would have felt compelled to put pen to paper. Lest this literary nugget be lost to posterity, I have attempted to capture it in my own unworthy fashion. I call this sordid little story Too Much to Swallow, and it is the story of the golden gastrolith of Calaveras County. Many tall tales are told of the old mother lode from the pens of Bret Harte and Mark Twain. To this treasury of Lord upon us bestowed is another. Please let me explain. One boisterous night in the Murphy's Hotel as the patrons lined up at the bar, an event took place too dubious to tell. 'Twas unseemly, quite gross, and bizarre. A miner walked in with an obvious grin and ordered drinks for the roistering crowd. The bar settled down to let him begin, which it did with a manner quite proud. From out of his pocket, a nugget he'd panned was placed where everyone saw, to be fondled and hefted in every hand, an object of envy and awe. When a patron inquired where the miner had dug it, the drinker slipped it into his beer, thinking, I'll have me that nugget, I'll just chug-a-lug it, and with one gulp, made the piece disappear. The barroom was stunned, but the miner was cool. From out of his belt came a knife, saying, cough up that nugget, you guzzling fool, if you want to enjoy further life. The swallower coughed and inhaled, but utterly failed to make a timely regurgence. So they locked him in jail without any bail to wait for the nugget's emergence. A 3-day transition from mouth to emission is a well-known medical fact, or so it was said by a local physician of a normal intestinal tract. But 3 days came and went, and he failed to expel, which greatly heightened the tension. A watch was put on the prisoner's cell, now the object of growing attention. Oh, but I cannot unveil in graphic detail the facts of the nugget's appearance. Decorum in poetry must prevail to shield their more gentle adherents. But it came to pass on the 7th day, when the guard heard the prisoner shout, unlock my cell, I'm on my way, that damnable nugget came up. The authorities gathered to examine the stool, a procedure I could not recommend. Not the normal discovery of gold as a rule, but all's well that comes out in the end. In the course of human events, most of us seek the love and companionship of a member of the opposite sex. And under normal circumstances, there is a 1-to-1 ratio of man to woman, so that each of us has a reasonable chance of achieving this ideal goal. But in much of our early history, particularly during the frontier and the gold rush days, the ratio of man to woman was skewed way out of proportion. Some western towns had 10 men for every woman. Other early settlements had 100 men for every woman. And some of the earliest mining camps that employed thousands of men had not one woman within a 50-mile radius. As in the case of anything which is desirable that becomes scarce, its price skyrockets beyond belief. A man dying of thirst will gladly pay $100 for a glass of water. And so it was with the frontier woman. Now, no one caught this feeling of awe and reverence for the fair sex any better than Mark Twain did in his book Roughing It, in which he described an incident where a lone pioneer-covered wagon was crossing an alkali flat out in the desert. And as this pioneer and his wife traversed this burning stretch of desert, heat waves dancing in the distance, they thought they spotted a little speck of dust way over on the horizon. And as they studied that speck of dust, it looked like it was becoming larger, as though it might be approaching him. The pioneer turned to his wife and he said, "Maud, I don't like the looks of this. I think you better get back inside the wagon." So she gets inside the wagon and he continues on studying this speck of dust, and it becomes a cloud and a larger and larger cloud, and out of this cloud emerges the most desperate-looking band of ruffians you could imagine, caked with dust, bearded to the eyes and armed to the teeth. They surrounded the wagon, and the leader held up his hand for it to stop. "You got a woman in there?" And the pioneer, knowing full well that he could not hide the obvious, said, Maud, you better come out here." So she came out and sat on the front seat with her husband. "Take your bonnet off, sister." So she obediently took off her bonnet so they could get a better look at her, and then nothing. The men just sat on their horses, transfixed by this rare apparition. No one moved, no one spoke. They just sat there in silent admiration. The time seemed to go on interminably in the broiling hot sun. And finally the leader took off his hat and he passed it around. And every man put in a handful of gold or silver coins. And with two hands, because this hat was very heavy now, he passed it up to the amazed pioneer, saying, "Stranger, we be much obliged to you. We ain't seen a white woman in 10 years. And with a whoop and holler, they spurred their horses and rode off in another cloud of dust, leaving the amazed pioneer, who 10 minutes ago figured he'd reached the end of the trail, now realizing he was going to get to California with a big grub stake, and all because he had a woman on board. Well, I've done some research into this period of our early social history, and I discovered, to my utter astonishment, that there were some women who attempted to correct this great discrepancy in numbers by making themselves available to more than one man. Can you imagine? But instead of earning the approbation and plaudits of a grateful society, they were more often the objects of scorn and derision. But I've written a small treatise on this, and I would like to bring it to you here today. It is not the fulfilling expose of frontier women, but I offer it to you for whatever insight it might bring into this period of our early social history. And it goes like this. In the days of old, when men sought for gold, they left the good women behind. An early mining camp was cold and damp, no place for the gentler kind. But some women were prone to seek men long alone, especially those favored with treasure, and with cheeks all abloom, they lured to their room lonely miners for a moment of pleasure. They measured a bloke by the size of his poke and calculated its contents of dust. They knew just what to reveal to make their presence appeal to a man's natural leaning for lust. The standard of pay for a girl of that day was a pinch from his pokeful of gold. But with nails 2 inches long, they didn't think it was wrong to triple the fee they could hold. But when the gold mines played out, 'twas a working girl's drought. No matter how seductive their urgings, oh, but it must have been sad. When times were so bad, some ladies left the profession still virgins. But many more played the game for money and fame in the temple of Aphrodite, for what man could resist being playfully kissed by a sprite wearing naught but a nightie? They cheered for Madame Mustache, who wore only a sash when she danced on top of the bar, nor did they complain of Calamity Jane or the wild and wicked Belle Star. Now, there was Paloma Peg, with one long and short leg, who found dance hall crowds quite forgiving. They didn't seem to care about her uneven pair, and between the two, made a good living. Now everyone says that Lola Montez was a toast from England to Spain, but she found greater renown in a rough mining town, where she kept a wild bear on a chain. Now nothing was worse for this career than the curse of spreading pox in the local community. Those girls enjoying success were lucky, I guess, in possessing a natural immunity. But when epidemics struck down many men from the town, the unafflicted fled for some place to hide. But those hardy wenches stayed there, providing rare nursing care for the miners who would have otherwise died. How quickly we blame those sisters of shame whose virtue was shop-worn and tattered. For there's some bad in the best of us and some good in the rest of us. And only God knew how much it mattered. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I rest my case.